At the crowded shelter, tails wagged and barks echoed as families searched for the perfect dog. But in the farthest corner sat one no one wanted, a German Shepherd mix with scars on his body and fear in his eyes. Visitors passed quickly, shaking their heads. Too aggressive, they whispered. Too dangerous. Days turned into months, and the cage became his prison. Workers marked him unadoptable. Yet one day, a man walked in, not searching for the friendliest dog, but the one who needed love most. He stopped at the lonely cage, and with one quiet gesture, everything changed. What followed shocked everyone, and proved that even the most broken souls can become heroes. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The shelter was filled with the sound of barking, sharp, desperate cries echoing off the cold concrete walls. But in the far corner, one cage stayed silent. Inside sat a German Shepherd mix, his fur matted, his eyes dull with exhaustion. His name was Shadow, though no one had called him that in months. The workers whispered when they passed his cage. "He's untrustworthy," one said. Snapped at a volunteer, another added. Every potential adopter avoided his corner, their eyes flicking past the sign that read, "Caution, aggressive," but Shadow wasn't aggressive. He was scared. The last human who touched him had done so with cruelty, not kindness. Now, when footsteps approached, his body tensed, expecting pain. Day after day, he watched other dogs leave, tails wagging, eyes bright, while his world stayed the same. Cold metal, dry food, loneliness. The days turned into weeks, then months. The workers stopped trying to coax him out. His file grew dusty, marked unadoptable. The light in his eyes faded a little more each day. Yet deep down, beneath the fear and silence, something small remained, a fragile hope that maybe, one day, someone would see the real him. One chilly morning, the shelter bell rang as a man stepped inside. His name was Daniel, a quiet, middle-aged veteran who had seen more pain in life than most could imagine. He wasn't looking for a perfect dog. He was looking for one that needed him. As he walked past the rows of wagging tails and excited barks, something drew his attention to the far corner. There, behind the bars, sat Shadow, silent, motionless, but with eyes that told a story Daniel recognized too well: loss, fear, and a plea for understanding. The shelter staff rushed to warn him. "Sir, not that one," the woman said gently. "He's been labeled aggressive. No one's been able to handle him." But Daniel didn't back away. He crouched down, keeping his distance, and simply whispered, "Hey, buddy, I'm not here to hurt you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Shadow's ears twitched, and his eyes flickered with a faint light, as if those few words cracked open something buried deep inside him. Daniel stayed like that for 10 minutes, speaking softly, his voice calm and steady. And for the first time in months, Shadow didn't turn away. He just listened up. By the next day, Daniel returned to the shelter, paperwork in hand. The staff looked at him in disbelief. "Are you sure?" one asked. "That dog's bitten before. He's not safe." Daniel only nodded. "He's not broken," he said quietly. "He's just scared." When the cage door finally opened, the room went silent. Shadow pressed himself against the back wall, trembling. But Daniel didn't rush him. He simply knelt down, set a small piece of cooked chicken on the floor, and waited. Minutes passed before Shadow took a cautious step forward, nose twitching. He sniffed, hesitated, then gently took the food. Daniel smiled, whispering, "Good boy." It was a moment the staff wouldn't forget. A connection, fragile but real, had formed. Daniel completed the adoption papers despite every warning and drove home with Shadow sitting quietly in the back seat, eyes darting nervously at the passing trees. When they arrived, Daniel opened the car door and stepped back. "You're free," he said softly. Shadow hesitated, one paw out, unsure of what freedom meant anymore. But then he looked up at Daniel, and for the first time, his tail gave a single, hesitant wag. It wasn't much, but it was enough to melt Daniel's heart. The first few days were tough. Shadow wouldn't eat unless Daniel left the room. He flinched at sudden movements and barked in his sleep, haunted by memories only he understood. Daniel didn't force him. He simply stayed close, speaking softly, letting the dog learn that kindness didn't come with pain. Every morning, Daniel would sit by the porch with his coffee, reading the newspaper, pretending not to notice Shadow watching him from a distance. It became a silent routine. On the 5th day, something changed. Shadow walked closer, cautiously, and rested his paw on Daniel's knee. Daniel froze, then smiled gently. "Good morning, soldier," he whispered. That simple moment was the first crack in Shadow's wall of fear. From then on, progress came slowly but surely. Daniel taught him commands with patience, rewarded every small act of trust with warmth instead of harshness. At night, when Shadow whimpered in his sleep, Daniel would sit beside him until the trembling stopped. The bond grew, not through training, but through quiet understanding. Weeks passed, and Shadow began to follow Daniel everywhere, into the yard, into town, even sitting at his feet as he worked on his old truck. The broken dog was healing, not just in body, but in soul. One afternoon, Daniel decided to bring Shadow back to the shelter for a checkup. The staff braced themselves as soon as they saw him walk through the doors. Whispers rippled among them. "That dog again. How is he even handling him?" But their voices fell silent when Shadow trotted calmly beside Daniel, his head held low but his eyes gentle, his tail wagging faintly. The workers stared in disbelief. "That can't be the same dog," one muttered. "He used to lunge at the bars, wouldn't let anyone near him." Daniel knelt and scratched behind Shadow's ears. He just needed someone to believe in him. He said simply. It was then that an older staff member pulled Daniel aside. She revealed what the others hadn't known: Shadow's history. He hadn't been aggressive by nature. He had once belonged to a man who used him for fights, forcing him to attack to survive. When he finally refused, he was beaten and abandoned. The scars on his body weren't from rage, but from punishment for showing mercy. Daniel's chest tightened as he looked at Shadow lying peacefully at his feet. The truth broke his heart. All those months, the dog wasn't dangerous. He was misunderstood, carrying the weight of a past no one bothered to uncover. Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You weren't the monster they thought you were. You were the bravest of them all." Shadow looked up, as if he finally understood he was free from his past. Months passed, and Shadow was no longer the trembling dog who hid in the back of a cage. He had transformed into Daniel Shadow in every sense of the word: loyal, protective, and endlessly devoted. Wherever Daniel went, Shadow followed, his once faded eyes now glowing with life. People in town began to notice. Neighbors who once crossed the street out of fear now stopped to pet him, amazed at his gentleness. Children laughed as he licked their hands, tail wagging happily. Daniel often thought back to the day he first saw Shadow, alone in that corner, labeled as dangerous. He shuddered to imagine what might have happened if he hadn't looked deeper. The bond they shared had become unbreakable, built not on fear or control, but on trust, patience, and love. Shadow wasn't just his pet. He was his companion, his healer, his family. In time, Daniel and Shadow began visiting the same shelter together, not as residents, but as volunteers. Shadow would sit calmly beside new arrivals, scared, broken dogs who reminded him of his own past. Slowly, they too would find courage in his presence. And so, the most hated dog became a symbol of second chances. A living reminder that no soul is too damaged to heal, and no heart too broken to love again. Daniel often whispered as Shadow lay at his side, "They called you unwanted, but you were always meant to be mine."